Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today we're talking about The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray, the 6-episode series starring Samuel Jackson, which aired on Apple TV Plus earlier this year. My guest is the lead cinematographer, Shawn Peters. Shawn, it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Warning for listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers. But before we dive into that, Shawn, you and I spoke some before, and I understand that your path to becoming a cinematographer is a little unusual.
Well, this is sort of my third career. The way I got into film school was honestly by accident. It's a long story, but, when we talk again, I'll tell you how I got into film school. And then when I came out of graduate school, I really didn't have a lot of opportunity, to shoot. It was before digital. It was a difficult time to also practice the craft because everything was film at the time. I guess maybe even as an African-American pursuing that career, there weren't that many of us. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 at most that were really working at a high level. Maybe there's 10 now at a high level. But yeah, so my options, were kind of PAing, and even that was difficult coming from where I didn't really know anybody. So I kind of got into technology by accident again, way before websites were even ubiquitous. This is like during the AOL dial-up.
What year are we talking about here?
We're talking about 96.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an early time. And me and my friend Warren, this kid I knew, he was like, yeah, I'm building websites, like one-page websites. And I was like, what's a website? And I kind of knew a little bit. I knew a little bit about it, but not really.
Yeah.
And he was like, why don't we partner together? You could do like the sales thing, and I'll build the sites for these for businesses, and we could start a company. It was called New York Magazine Online. And our goal was sort of like to get African-American businesses, primarily in Harlem and the Bronx area where we lived, to have little websites, and we would consolidate them on this page. And it was more like, whatever. It was like a magazine sort of format more than like big, robust websites. But at the time, it was difficult. Businesses were like, what's that? Well, why would we need a website? Our customers aren't online like that, blah, blah, blah. And I was broke. I was just out of school and needed work. So his brother actually was this data account executive for AT&T. And I was like, how'd you get that Mercedes? He was just kind of like, well, I sell T1 lines, direct lines to Japan from New York for banks to transfer data. And I was like, wow, how much does that pay? I was like, so I got an interview with AT&T and I got the job. So I ended up as an account executive and kind of got into the internet, kind of the data world and the IT world through AT&T. And then one of my customers was this African-American owned information technology company that was one of my clients. And so I would interact with them and interface with them a lot. And they were like, why don't you come work for us? And so I ended up, 25 or something like that. Or, and they offered me, I think at that time, $95,000 base salary with plus commission. But the division that I was in was the sort of more hardcore sort of networking division where we were building infrastructure. That division decided they wanted to leave and start their own company. And I was just there. Maybe I was there 6 months, maybe 7 months at the most. And they're like, you want to come?
Wow.
You could be a partner in our company. And I was like, oh. So I was like, now I'm a partner in this company based in New Jersey. I'm traveling from city to city and from New York to New Jersey. And I have this company. And, we made some money, a lot of money quickly. And then the internet, the kind of crash happened. We lost a lot of money. And I ended up sort of taking a payment. And my friend that I went to high school and college with was like, yeah, I'm working with this artist that we all both knew from college. And I was like, well, I'll invest, So we ended up starting this record label, and I ended up producing records and A&R records and going on tour, and lost all my money, in the music business. And so I made a name in the music business, I started doing festivals and consulting for other music clients and labels and things like that. And it just wasn't what I wanted to do, So I had literally, I was hemorrhaging money, and I had $5,000 in the bank. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, what do you really want to do? We started talking about each other and our own careers. And that friend, he was a musician from Ghana, and we were talking about his career. And I was like, why are you trying to rap, man? Why are you trying to sound like Nas? You should make Highlight from Ghana. Make something that's different. You're Ghanaian. Why you sound like a dude from Queens, So he like took that advice and made this whole album called Native Son that had a mixture of like Ghanaian high life and hip hop. And then I took my little money and I went to NYU for this little summer course that was like $4,000. And then I bought like whatever DSLR that was just came out. I think it was the Canon 7D or whatever that did like video, you know, whatever. And it's like literally it was like $1,000 or something. So I like spent every dime of whatever money I had. And then just by luck, I didn't know how I was gonna pay my rent. This artist from Rotterdam, the Netherlands, was like a fan of the records that I was working on the label. So he contacted me through a friend and was like, I want to record an album in America and I want you to help me and I can pay you like a consulting fee. So I was like, you know, bet, let's make it work. And we made this record. And then after the record was made, he was like, you know, do you think you can come to Holland and talk to some of the labels for me? And I was like, sure. So I went to, and at the time I happened to be dating a woman from Rotterdam. You know, it just started. Like she met her in New York.
That's a nice coincidence, sure.
It was a nice coincidence. I ended up there. So I ended up, you know, spend some time with her there. I had my little camera and I was like, you know, while we're here, why don't we just make a music video? So I did this music video with him. And then I came back to the States and I was just online. I saw this Indiegogo campaign for a short film by this director named Terrence Nance. And I was like, whoa, this dude is amazing. This dude is incredible. He's somebody I'd love to meet. And like, it couldn't have been 2 or 3 weeks later, I ran into him like on the platform of the subway, literally. And, you know, because he has this big hair, so it was easy to spot him. And I walked up to him, I was like, yo, wow, I just saw, are you Terrence Nance? I just saw your campaign. And he was like, yeah, I just moved back here. And I was like, wow. And then we started talking. He was like, what do you do? And I was just like, I just said it. I was like, I'm a cinematographer. He was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, he's like, you have a camera? I said, yeah. He's like, well, can you send me something? So I had that one music video from Holland. I sent it to him. And he was like, oh man, this is really beautiful. He was like, can you work with me on a music video of a friend of mine? His name is Blitz the Ambassador. And that's the kid that I was talking to about the high life, the Ghanaian music. I was like, oh, no, Blitz, that's my boy.
Wow.
And then we ended up shooting Blitz's music video. And we made a short film as a music video, which is kind of predated what people are doing that a lot, sort of about a year later, but no one was kind of doing that then. So that got the attention. When that video came out, it got the attention of a lot of artists, and we started shooting a lot, getting requested to shoot a lot of music videos. So that happened, and then he was working on a film called The Oversimplification of Her Beauty, which was an extension of that short film I saw the Indiegogo campaign for. Mm-hmm. So I ended up working on that, and then that film got into Sundance. And then we started making a few shorts after that, and a few shorts got in the film festivals and got a lot of attention. And 2 things happened to me. One day I got an inbox message for my website, and one of them was from a guy named Jordan Peele, right? So he inboxed me and he said, hey, you know, I just had a meeting with Bradford Young, and I was telling him about my new film that I'm trying to do, and I don't think he can do it. You know, he told me about you. And so I was like, oh, wow. So he was like, and I knew who Jordan Peele was from the Key and Peele show. I was like, I'm a big fan. And he was like, oh, wow. So he sent me this script for this film called Get Out, you know, and I read the film, and I was like, fuck, man, they're going to let you make this? This is probably a year or 2 before they made it. So anyway, we got into a lot of conversations about it, and he ended up flying to New York. We ended up having dinner, and we hit it off right away, like as people and friends. At that time, I'd done a small film too. I did one feature, another feature, Oversimplification, and another feature called 72 Hours, A Brooklyn Love Story. Really, and I got in the LA Film Festival. Uh-huh. So I'm out there meeting with Jordan Peele. I met with the production company who had the film at the time. And they were like, well, Jordan, you're a first-time director. This dude's only done 1 movie, 2 movies, max, and we need a real horror DP. So I didn't get the job. Mm-hmm. But all that, long story short, not long after that, I had met with another 180 Bradford's agency, and they kind of met with me, and then they patted me on the head, and they were like, get some more work, you know, under your belt, and we'll holler at you, you know. And I was like, all right. And so I went back to New York and was like, I was working. So I wasn't like making a ton of money, but I was making good money as a DP at this point. I was making a living. And then couldn't have been a week or 2 after that one agency meeting where they patted me on the head. I got an inbox from a woman named Mary Young. And she was like, hi, I'm Mary Young from the William Morris Agency. I'd like to take a meeting with you. She was in New York at the time when they had the New York office. And she was like, you know, would you like to have breakfast? And I was like, okay. So I had breakfast with her. I'm talking to her, and we hit it off very well. And so I was like, "Thank you," and I was about to leave because I figured it was going to be like the other agency meetings, you know. And then she was like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She was like, "Well," she was like, "Well, I want to sign you to William Morris." And I was like, "What? Can you give me a day to make a decision?" And I was like, I called Bradford, and I was like, "Oh man, what do you think? You know, Mira Young, blah blah blah." He was like, "Mira Young from William Morris? She's amazing. You should sign with her." So I ended up signing with Mira, and she's really a great architect, you know. So she kind of chipped away and got me like two features and read the right features for me, stood behind me, and I am where I am now.
And so, how does it come together then for Ptolemy Gray?
You know, at this point, you know, I'm fairly successful DP before Ptolemy Gray happened. You know, not a series of that size, you know, but I've done a few features and I've done a lot of commercial work at this point. You know, there's a producer named Diane Housling who used to produce those masterclass videos. So I used to do those. I used to DP some of those. It's like David Mamet and a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't even think of all. Steve Martin did Herbie Hancock and a few other people early masterclass. They sought me out and was like, "We want to look at this aesthetic and looking to make this more filmic looking. You know, can you help us? You know, blah blah." So a friend of mine, Nikisa, who was a producer, hired Diane, and Diane and I friends in common. We became sort of friends through that process, and so at a certain point, Masterclass I guess couldn't afford me, and Diane would call me and complain like, "Your agent doesn't even take my calls." And so I was like, "I know it's your fee is, you know." But anyway, she called me. She happens to be Walter Mosley's business partner and producer. So she called me and she was like, I want you to read these screenplays." And I was like, "Sure." She's like, "The director's Ramin Barani, so you have to sort of meet with him, and he's executive producer and directing the pilot, so he has to sort of want to work with you. But I've told him about you, he saw your work, and he's interested in talking to you." So I took a meeting, you know, I read them. I thought, "Oh, Diane, I love these screenplays. You know, we should talk." You know, so I met with Ramin, and you know, usually what I do is I put together like a pitch presentation, usually about 100 pages, you know, slides, and the way I kind of pitch isn't an aesthetic only pitch. It's really about story, you know. So I go through a whole narrative journey of how you can use lighting and the camera and to tell the story, basically, and emotionally. And then aesthetic is usually the last thing I talk about because that usually changes, you know, once you get into the, you know, once you start talking to the director, you really nail that out. But you don't want to say this is the aesthetic of the film. It's, it's about how you view the story. And so we did that, and he hired me, you know, or they hired me, and they were like, well, you know, it was very rushed because Apple was kind of pushing them to get started because it was a schedule situation for Samuel Jackson. He had like a hard out to do like the Avengers or something like that, or the other one, his solo thing, you know, Nick Fury or whatever. So he had to like go to London and do like a Nick Fury movie or something, and he was like, "This is it, so we got to start like bang bang." And so they hired me quickly, but it was like they didn't really know it was going to be one DP or two DPs. So it was a lot of conversation with me around like they didn't even have all the directors hired. There's 6 episodes, and Ramin can only do at the time can only do 1 and 6. So initially, I was only supposed to do 1 and 6 with Ramin, you know, and I was like, okay, and they were like, "We don't even know who the other directors are yet." So they were trying to hire last minute. People were not available. So finally, once they started getting a little bit of traction, they were like, they're like, you know, "Would you be opposed to bringing on another DP if you were part of the hiring process?" Blah, 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 blah. So that kind of happened late. That happened after we had already started pre-production. I'm in Atlanta already by that time. So there's another DP that was working with Diane on Masterclass. In fact, when I first met her, Hilda Mercado, when I first met her, she was a camera operator for one of the things that I was shooting. And then she started DPing them. And she's a fantastic DP, but she hadn't done anything of the scale. So it was really, you know, she's a woman of color, Mexican woman. And Diane really wanted to push DPs of color, women, that kind of thing was really important to the production. So she gave Hilda a chance and she delivered, you know, hugely. But she came on sort of a bit later in pre-production, and we were able to sort of, you know, she was able to sort of get in sync with me. And by that time I'd already hired the crew, and She kind of came on and we did a camera test, and she was really respectful. I want to follow what you're going to do. And she did her own thing as well. Obviously a lot of her own thing. And it was beautiful. But yeah, that's kind of how the process worked. And Ramin and our process, well, we'd spend a lot of time in his apartment in Atlanta, his rental apartment, just looking at footage. We did a lot of looking at films. Ramin's also a professor at Columbia. He's a film professor, so he referenced a lot of movies, and his sort of film intellect and literacy is very high. It was a lot of let's get on the same page of, what we're thinking. And he was open to what I was thinking. It wasn't like, I'm thinking this and this is what I'm thinking. He was like, what are you thinking? What do you have? And I'll bring this, I'll bring that. So he was very open to me. I didn't even question anything in terms of lens choice. I hired my colorist. I had LUTs made.
You said LUTs. What's LUTs?
So a LUT is a lookup table. It's basically the color treatment that you put into the camera. So it's like having a color treatment in the camera that you can view on the monitors. So you're seeing the color. You're seeing at least a preset of a color treatment. We made 3 of those treatments. One for the modern day, one for his flashbacks to the 30s when he was a kid, and then one for his flashbacks with his ex-wife in the 70s. We started with those 3. We had different lenses as well for different emotional periods of his life.
Well, this might be a good point for us to talk about story. I think it's interesting when you talked about not bringing in the aesthetic, but first talking about how cinematography is going to be part of that story. And the story here is that Ptolemy Gray has dementia, but through a medical procedure, he gains clarity for a period of time. And of course, there's dramatic events going on around that. But his state of mind and really the world around him is a huge part of that. I'm guessing figuring out how to capture that was a big part of these conversations.
There is this transition, right? From full dementia, being a recluse, and having really only contact with really one person, his nephew Reggie, to being after Reggie gets killed, he gets thrust into this new world with this new person and this new procedure. And then all of a sudden he has this kind of hope and a new mind and kind of a new lease on life temporarily. But it really, when we talk about the story in his internal world, why was he dealing with dementia? Why was he a recluse? And why? And, we sort of unpack that a bit. This is a person who dealt with a lot of regret, felt like he wasn't actualizing things in his life, that he didn't amount to much, and he didn't have the courage to sort of actualize himself. He didn't take the charge of his mentor, Coy Dog. And there was a lot of things that he was struggling with internally around regret and non-actualization, which we maybe assume that that's what kind of pushed him into this sort of state of retreating, so he became someone who lost his memory and lost his ability to sort of function in the world and be a part of it. And so our thinking photographically was we'd start the series really dark and really cold. The light that would come into the apartment, even the way we lit him, was primarily from the windows. We didn't do a lot of wrapping fill light or beauty light on him in the first episode. We wanted to feel like you walk into this person's apartment. You almost wanted to smell visually. We wanted to feel like this is putrid and desolate, and it's not beautiful. And so we allowed things to feel naturalistic, but also cold. So the lights we were using were a cooler color temperature, and it was like it was overcast outside. So a lot more softer pushes inside the windows. Then we built this apartment on stage, so we could do anything. So a lot more soft pushes, a little cooler light, and the windows were more closed. There wasn't a lot light coming in. Sometimes he would go into complete darkness, which was scary for me, to be honest. I was like, oh my God, did I go too far? And there was also a bit of, I won't get in too deeply, but there was a bit of a conflict between Ramin and Sam on set. So that created a bit of a tension that you can feel in the first episode, but it also maybe helped his performance in some way. It was interesting, but it's hard for me to watch that first episode sometimes because it's almost anti-beautiful sometimes, but I know it's right for the story. And sometimes as a cinematographer, you got to be brave. And then I was able to sort of redeem myself a little bit in episode 3, 6, because I brought more hope in, I brought more beauty into the world.
So I noticed when his apartment gets cleaned up, it actually does become brighter. Like you are making choices about how you film. It's more than just clearing the space and moving stuff from the windows. You're able to see things differently.
He pushed brighter. We made much brighter. The sun that we made come through the window is more directional. It's warmer. You use a different set of lenses. It shifts, you know. And then if you notice, I don't know if you watched the whole series, but if you notice that at the end, when he's in the hospital, it goes back to that sort of gritty, cold, less warm, less beautiful world again.
As he's fallen off, what he's returned to.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Shawn, you also mentioned the flashbacks, and there's him from his childhood, and then him meeting the woman that becomes his wife in the 70s. And then there's also visions where sometimes his wife appears now, but it's also clearly filmed in a way that it's not full flashback, but I'm just fascinated about how all that comes together from your perspective.
Well, we were really intentional about making sure we separated those different things visually. And we didn't want to, have a ghost appear with like VFX or something. We didn't want like a CG person to like appear out of the wall. We talked about that. I think there's one conversation with some of the people, I can't remember who, but eventually they were like, oh, let's do that. And we're like, no, we don't want to do that. Wanted them to be natural in his life in a way, and they would just be there with the camera move. And then we used different in-camera optical techniques, different types of glass, like diopters. We even broke glass and put it in front of the lens at times. And at one point, when he looks through the eyepiece of his apartment, that's basically a super wide angle lens. We cut off the bottom of a Martinelli's cider bottle and put that over the lens to make that sort of eyepiece effect and dirtied it up.
I do remember that shot, yeah.
So we used a lot of like practical effects on the lens itself as opposed to post. And so we wanted the flashbacks to be a different color palette, obviously different set design, but different color palette, different feelings, but we wanted them to be cinematic. We thought he would embellish his dreams. Dreams are often romanticized. You don't dream in like a sort of hyper-realistic way like your life is. I would never dream about doing the Zoom call. It'd be something else. It'd be a heightened emotion.
Right.
So we wanted the dreams to feel more heightened and more cinematic. So even in the dreams, they're like more crane shots and like much more bigger scope and more romantic in a way. And his life is less that. Once Robin comes in, it gets more of that. But because even though there's not a sexual romance, there is a romance, love affair between the two of them. So it becomes more loving and warm and, browner, warmer. But the people from his past, I feel like if you were someone having a delusion about someone from your past in your room, it would just feel like they were there. So that was just a real clear decision. But we wanted to skew his vision during that time. And even when you see him, there was another lens an old French lens, an Ingenue lens. It was a set of lenses made for surveillance, and they were really fast, meaning the aperture opened really wide to let a lot of light in. And so when that happens, the depth of field is really super shallow, right? So there was a lens, we used that lens. It was a kind of possibly shallow lens every time the camera was on him when he was up. Many times when he was in an internal, we wanted to show him like in an internal world, like he would just escape inside himself. We put that on and the whole world behind him. A lot of things we did were in camera. There was obviously a lot of VFX as well, like extending world, extending 1930s.
Sure.
Some of the internal fire stuff, But as much as we could, we did in camera.
Now, when you were talking about the relationship they have on screen, it reminded me of when you joined me last season to talk about the Oscar nominees for cinematography, and we talked a little bit about collaboration. And you said that was like dating, with all the connections and vulnerabilities that go along with that. Tell me a little bit about what the collaboration was like on Ptolemy Gray.
Television is a little different from feature films. I think feature films, the collaboration is a bit more romantic. Because you're with one director and you have a longer period of time with one person, and you're very vulnerable. You're opening up. Anytime you're opening up a creative space with someone, I think it's a very similar energy to like romantic and sexual energy. Even if it's the same gender, you kind of fall in love with them. Even if you're not queer or whatever, of opposite gender, same thing. You kind of fall in love with them. I worked on a film with a trans male director, and I fell in love with him, And not to say, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
But yeah, you sort of like fall in love for a temporary period of time because you're so open. If you're a person who would shut that there's that feeling off because of whatever your mind or whatever thing your hang up is about that, I think you don't achieve the same level of output. You have to almost be open to it.
So does that mean in TV though, because you are working with a more, I don't know, larger group of people, and as you mentioned, several directors,
Yeah.
but you still achieve that same kind
It's just
of
faster.
feelings, or how
You
does it
do,
play
it's
different?
just not as long.
Hmm.
The dating period is not as long. So it's more of a love affair than it is a relationship. It's like a one night stand. It's like you're still attracted, but you're not gonna live with the person. Whereas a feature film is more like a marriage to a certain extent, albeit short. TV is more like, you're still protective, of the new directors that come in. You're protective of them and you're protective of their vision. You're open to them, but it's like, you're working with them for, a couple of weeks as opposed to 3 months.
Shawn, on that, we're going to call it a wrap. It's really great having you here.
Thank you, Skid. I appreciate it, man. It was a great talk, great conversation.
Listeners, I also appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline.oneword.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Shawn, what have you been working on? Where else can people see your work?
I just finished a series for HBO called Random Acts of Finance. We jumped right off that series and went right into commercials. So I just shot a commercial in Mexico City, and next week I'm headed to Kenya and Uganda to shoot another commercial. And I'm on Instagram, Shawn Peezy, P-E-E-Z-I-E, S-H-O-W-N-P-E-Z-I-E, ShawnPeters.com, whatever. Don't really update it that much.
That's not the best place to catch you. Well, Shawn,
Yeah.
I love having you on the show. We'll get you back to talk about some of these other projects. For me, closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I do appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.